The cold wind sliced through Eleanor Bradford's thin dress as she stood on the narrow railroad bridge that spanned the churning Coeur d'Alene River, her toes inching closer to the edge as tears froze on her cheeks in the bitter February night of 1883. She had walked 3 miles from Wallace, Idaho in the dark, leaving behind the cramped boarding house room where her father's body still lay waiting for burial, where the landlady's cruel words still echoed about unpaid rent and debts she could never hope to repay. 21 years old and utterly alone in this harsh silver mining town, Eleanor saw nothing ahead but more suffering, more hunger, more shame. The icy water below promised an end to all of it. Her fingers were numb as she gripped the iron railing, preparing to let go. The bridge swayed slightly in the wind, or perhaps it was just her own trembling. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer for forgiveness, then began to lift her foot over the edge. Strong hands suddenly grabbed her waist and yanked her backward with such force that they both stumbled onto the wooden planks of the bridge. Eleanor cried out in shock and fear as she found herself pulled tight against a solid chest, powerful arms wrapped around her middle, holding her several feet from the edge. "Let me go," she screamed, struggling against the grip. "Not a chance," a deep voice said close to her ear, roughened by emotion. "Not a chance in hell." She fought harder, trying to twist free, but the arms only tightened. Her attacker or savior, she could not tell which, turned her around forcibly, and she found herself staring up into the most striking pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a man perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble. He wore a heavy coat and a dusty black hat that had fallen back on its stampede string during their struggle. Even in her despair, some part of her registered that he was undeniably handsome. "Please," Eleanor sobbed, still trying to pull away. "Please just let me go. You don't understand. Then help me understand." His voice cracked slightly as he held her close, not loosening his grip even a fraction. His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Please stay. Whatever it is, whatever you are running from, please stay and talk to me. Why do you care?" The words came out as a broken whisper. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to know you to know your life has value." He loosened his hold just slightly, enough that she was no longer pressed against him, but still firmly in his grasp. "I don't need to know you to know that whatever brought you here tonight is not worth throwing yourself into that river." Eleanor's legs gave out and she sagged in his arms. He immediately scooped her up and carried her away from the edge of the bridge, setting her down only when they reached solid ground on the Wallace side. She crumpled onto the frozen earth, wrapping her arms around herself and sobbing so hard her whole body shook. The stranger knelt beside her, shrugging out of his heavy coat and draping it around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body and smelled of leather and pine and something uniquely masculine. He kept one hand on her back, a steady presence as she fell completely apart. "My father," she finally managed to gasp out between sobs. "My father died 3 days ago. The mine collapsed. They brought him out, but he died that night. And now I have nothing. Nothing. He owed money everywhere. The landlady says I have to be out by morning or she will have the sheriff drag me out. I have nowhere to go, no family, no money, not even enough for his burial." She looked up at the stranger with wild eyes. "Don't you see? There is nothing left for me here, nothing." The man's jaw tightened and something flickered in his gray eyes. Anger perhaps, but not directed at her. "What is your name, Eleanor? Eleanor Bradford." "Eleanor, my name is Zachary Marlowe. I am a wrangler and trader, and I have been in Wallace for about 2 months now." He helped her to her feet, keeping the coat wrapped around her shoulders. "And I am going to help you if you will let me." "Why?" She searched his face, looking for the catch, the ulterior motive. Men did not help women out of kindness in her experience, not without expecting something in return. Because I was standing on a bridge very much like this one about 5 years ago, Zachary said quietly, up in Montana. And someone stopped me. Someone took the time to care when I was certain nobody in the world gave a damn whether I lived or died. So I made myself a promise that if I ever had the chance, I would do the same for someone else. Eleanor stared at him, seeing the truth of it in his eyes. What happened to you? That is a longer story. He glanced back toward town. Right now, we need to get you somewhere warm before you freeze to death out here. Come on. He kept a supportive hand on her elbow as they walked back toward Wallace. The town was mostly quiet at this late hour, though light and noise spilled from several saloons along the main street. Zachary led her past these, steering toward a modest hotel near the edge of town. Eleanor's heart sank. I told you, I have no money for lodging. I did not ask if you did. He pushed open the door and guided her inside. The night clerk, a middle-aged man with spectacles, looked up from his newspaper. Evening, Marlowe. What can I do for you? I need a room for the lady. Separate from my own, she will be staying for at least a few nights. The clerk's eyes traveled over Eleanor's disheveled state with poorly concealed curiosity, but Zachary's stern look cut off any questions. Money changed hands, and soon Eleanor found herself being led up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room on the second floor. Zachary lit the lamp and checked that the small stove had enough fuel. Get warm and get some rest, he said, turning toward the door. I will be in room 7 if you need anything. We will talk more in the morning. Wait. Eleanor caught his sleeve. I don't understand why you are doing this. Zachary looked down at where her hand gripped his arm, then met her eyes. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us that we are not as alone as we think we are. Sleep, Eleanor. Things always look different in the daylight. After he left, Eleanor stood in the center of the room for a long time, unable to quite process what had just happened. Finally, the cold drove her to stoke the fire and huddle close to the stove. She wrapped herself in the blanket from the bed, still wearing Zachary's coat over her dress. Despite everything, despite the grief and fear that still churned in her chest, she felt the smallest spark of something she had not felt in days. Not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of hope. She must have fallen asleep, because the next thing she knew, gray dawn light was filtering through the thin curtains. Someone was knocking softly at her door. Eleanor rose stiffly, every muscle aching from exhaustion and the cold. She opened the door to find Zachary standing there with a tray bearing a simple breakfast of bread, butter, eggs, and coffee. Thought you might be hungry, he said. Eleanor's stomach clenched at the sight of food. She had not eaten properly in 2 days. Thank you, she whispered, stepping back to let him in. Zachary set the tray on the small table by the window and waited while she sat and began to eat. He did not press her to talk, simply stood looking out at the waking town. Eleanor studied him in the better light. He was tall and lean, with the build of someone who worked hard with his hands. His clothes were simple but well made, practical rather than fancy. There was something quiet and contained about him, like a man who had learned to keep his emotions tightly controlled. You said you would help me, Eleanor said after she had taken the edge off her hunger. But I still do not understand what you mean. Zachary turned from the window. First, we need to deal with your immediate problems, your father's burial and your lodging. Then we can think about what comes next. I cannot accept more charity from you. You have already done so much. It is not charity, Eleanor. Consider it a loan if that makes you feel better. You can pay me back when you are on your feet again. He pulled out the other chair and sat across from her. Tell me about your father's debts. How much are we talking about? Eleanor's cheeks burned with shame, but she forced herself to be honest. The landlady says he owed her for 3 weeks' rent. That is $15. And there are debts at the general store, the saloon where he drank. Maybe another $20 altogether. As for the burial, her voice broke. A proper funeral costs more than I can ever hope to repay. Zachary was quiet for a moment, thinking. $35 is manageable. And I know the undertaker. We can arrange something dignified without breaking the bank. He leaned forward, his gray eyes serious. But Eleanor, after we deal with all that, what do you want to do? Do you have any skills, any trade? I can read and write and do figures. My mother taught me before she died when I was 12. I can sew passably, and I know how to keep house. She twisted her hands in her lap. My father and I came here 6 months ago from Denver. He heard about the silver strikes and thought he could make our fortune. Instead, he just drank away what little money we had. She had not meant to sound so bitter, but the truth of her father's failings came pouring out. Thomas Bradford had been a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity, the next sure thing. Her mother had been the practical one, the one who held their family together. After she died, everything had slowly fallen apart. Eleanor had tried to hold on to her father, to save him from himself, but in the end she had failed. You did not fail him, Zachary said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Some people are determined to destroy themselves no matter how much others try to help. Trust me, I know. There was such weight in those words that Eleanor looked up sharply. Is that what happened to you? What brought you to that bridge in Montana? Zachary's expression went carefully blank. That is a story for another time. Right now, we need to focus on you. He stood and moved toward the door. Get cleaned up and meet me downstairs in an hour. We will go speak to your landlady and get your father's affairs in order. The next several hours passed in a blur. Zachary was true to his word, accompanying Eleanor to the boarding house and calmly paying off the outraged landlady. The woman sputtered and tried to inflate the debt, but Zachary would have none of it, producing Thomas Bradford's actual ledger from his room and forcing her to admit the true amount owed. They collected Eleanor's few belongings and her father's trunk, which contained mostly worthless items except for a few things of sentimental value. From there, they went to the undertaker. Zachary negotiated a simple but respectable burial to take place that very afternoon. Eleanor stood mutely by as the arrangements were made, overwhelmed by this stranger's kindness. When she tried again to protest, Zachary simply shook his head. We are past the point of protests. Just accept the help, Eleanor. The funeral was small, attended only by Eleanor, Zachary, and a handful of miners who had known her father. The preacher said a few words over the pine coffin, and then Thomas Bradford was laid to rest in the windswept cemetery on the hill above Wallace. Eleanor stood at the graveside long after the others had drifted away, saying her private goodbyes. Zachary waited a respectful distance away, hat in hand, not rushing her. Finally, she turned away from the fresh grave and walked to where he stood. I do not know how to thank you. You do not need to thank me. He offered his arm. Come on. It has been a long day and you need a proper meal. He took her to a small restaurant, not fancy but clean and respectable, and ordered them both steak and potatoes. As they ate, Eleanor felt some of the numbness that had gripped her since her father's death begin to ease. The food was good, the room was warm, and across from her sat a man who had saved her life and asked nothing in return. It was so strange, so unexpected that she almost did not know how to process it. Why did you want to jump? She asked suddenly. Back in Montana. What happened to you? Zachary's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully and was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he would not answer. Finally, he said, I was engaged to be married. Her name was Catherine, and I loved her more than anything. We had known each other since we were children. When I was 20, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. We were going to have a small ranch, raise horses, have a family. His jaw tightened. Then I found out she had been seeing another man behind my back. Someone richer, someone with better prospects. She broke off the engagement 3 weeks before the wedding. Married him a month later. Eleanor's heart clenched. I am so sorry. I thought my life was over. I lost the woman I loved, lost the future I had planned, lost everything that mattered to me. I could not see any way forward. So I rode out to a bridge over the Yellowstone River one night, planning to end it. He looked up at her. But there was this old rancher there, sitting on his horse, smoking a cigarette. He took one look at me and knew exactly what I was planning. He talked to me for 3 hours. Told me about losing his own wife and child to fever, about how he had wanted to die too, but he had kept going. And eventually the pain had eased, not gone away, but become bearable. Did it? Eleanor asked softly. Did your pain become bearable, eventually? Zachary's gray eyes held hers. I will not lie to you, Eleanor. It took time. Lots of time. And there were days I was not sure I would make it. But that rancher, his name was Joseph. He gave me work on his spread. Taught me everything about horses and cattle. Gave me a purpose when I had none. And slowly, very slowly, I started to heal. What happened to him? To Joseph? He died 2 years ago. Left me a small inheritance, enough to buy my own string of horses and start trading. I travel now, buying and selling stock, wrangling when I can. It is not the life I planned, but it is a good life. He paused. And it taught me that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us leads us exactly where we need to be. Eleanor absorbed this, thinking about her own shattered plans and lost hopes. I do not know where I need to be. That is all right. We will figure it out together. The casual way he included himself in her future made Eleanor's pulse quicken. You cannot mean to stay in Wallace on my account. You have your own life, your own work. I was planning to stay here through the spring anyway. Good market for horses with all the miners coming in. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. And I would like to make sure you are settled before I move on, if that is all right with you. It was more than all right. Eleanor found herself nodding, relief flooding through her. She was not ready to face the world alone yet. Having Zachary nearby, even temporarily, felt like a lifeline. Over the next few days, they fell into an unexpected routine. Zachary spent his mornings working with his horses in a corral he rented at the edge of town, while Eleanor tried to find employment. It was harder than she expected. Wallace was a rough mining town, not particularly welcoming to respectable single women. The few legitimate jobs available, mostly in laundries or as servants in the homes of mine supervisors, were already filled. The other opportunities, working in saloons and dance halls, carried implications Eleanor was not willing to accept. Each evening, she and Zachary would meet for dinner, and she would report on her lack of progress. He never seemed frustrated or impatient, simply thoughtful. There has to be something, he said on the 4th evening. You are educated, well-spoken. What about teaching? The town has a teacher already, a man from back east. What about keeping books? Surely some of the businesses could use help with their accounting. Eleanor had not thought of that. The next day, she made rounds to various establishments, offering her services. Most turned her away, but the owner of the largest general store, a pragmatic woman named Mrs. Chen, agreed to give her a trial. She needed someone to organize her chaotic ledgers and keep track of inventory. The work was tedious, but Eleanor threw herself into it with determination. Mrs. Chen was a fair employer, paying a modest but regular wage. It was enough to cover Eleanor's room at the hotel with a little left over. She insisted on starting to repay Zachary, but he refused. Keep your money. Build yourself a nest egg. You never know when you might need it. As the weeks passed, Eleanor found herself looking forward to her evenings with Zachary more and more. They talked about everything, from their childhoods to their dreams to their opinions on everything from politics to the best way to train a horse. Zachary was easy to talk to, a good listener who asked thoughtful questions. He told her more about his travels, the places he had been, the people he had met. In turn, she told him about growing up in Denver, about her mother's love of books and music, about the slow decline after her death. What surprised Eleanor most was how comfortable she felt with him. Despite the dramatic circumstances of their meeting, there was nothing awkward between them. Zachary treated her with respect and kindness, never presuming or pushing for anything more than friendship. Yet there were moments when she caught him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something warm and almost tender in his eyes. It was during one of their dinners, nearly a month after they had met, that Eleanor realized she was falling in love with him. They were arguing good-naturedly about whether the new transcontinental railroad was a blessing or a curse for the frontier. Zachary held that it brought too much Eastern influence too quickly, while Eleanor maintained that progress was inevitable and should be embraced. He was laughing at something she said, his whole face transformed by the rare smile, and Eleanor felt her heart skip in her chest. This man had saved her life. He had given her hope when she had none. He had asked nothing in return, content simply to be her friend. And now, looking at him across the table, she wanted so much more than friendship. The realization terrified her. What if he did not feel the same? What if she ruined this precious connection by wanting too much? She forced herself to focus on her food, afraid her feelings would be written all over her face. "Eleanor, are you all right?" Zachary's concerned voice broke through her thoughts. "Yes, fine, just tired." She managed a smile. "It has been a long day at the store." He looked like he wanted to press the issue, but let it drop. As he walked her back to the hotel, Eleanor was acutely aware of his presence beside her. When they reached her door and he bid her good night, his hand briefly touched her shoulder, and she felt the contact like a brand even through the fabric of her dress. That night, Eleanor lay awake for hours, her mind racing. She thought about Catherine, the woman who had broken Zachary's heart so completely that he had nearly ended his life. Had he truly healed from that? Was he capable of loving again? And even if he was, why would he choose someone like Eleanor? She had nothing to offer, no family, no money, no prospects beyond her modest job at the general store. The next morning, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, Eleanor made her way to the store. Mrs. Chen took one look at her and sent her to make tea. "You look terrible, child. What is wrong?" Eleanor had not intended to confide in anyone, but Mrs. Chen had a way of drawing out secrets. Before she knew it, the whole story came tumbling out, from the bridge to her growing feelings for Zachary. Mrs. Chen listened without interruption, her weathered face thoughtful. When Eleanor finished, she said, "This man, Zachary, does he treat you well, better than anyone ever has? Does he make you laugh? Does he listen when you speak?" "Yes, to both." "And when you are with him, do you feel like your best self, or do you feel like you must pretend to be someone you are not?" Eleanor thought about this. "I feel like I can be completely honest with him, like he sees all of me, even the broken parts, and does not mind." Mrs. Chen nodded. "That is rare, Eleanor, very rare. Most people spend their whole lives looking for someone who makes them feel that way. But what if he does not feel the same way about me? What if he does?" Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow. "You will not know unless you take the risk. And life is too short to let fear keep you from happiness." Eleanor knew the older woman was right, but that did not make it any less terrifying. She resolved to say something to Zachary, to at least hint at her feelings and see how he responded. But every time she tried, the words stuck in her throat. Spring was arriving in earnest now, the snow melting from the mountains and the days growing longer. Zachary spent more time with his horses, preparing for what he said would be a profitable selling season. Eleanor tried not to think about what would happen when he eventually left Wallace. The thought of being without him made her chest tight with panic. One Saturday in late April, Zachary appeared at the store just as Eleanor was closing up. "Come with me," he said, a light in his eyes she had not seen before. "I want to show you something." Intrigued, Eleanor let him lead her to the stable where he kept his horses. In the corral was a beautiful mare, deep chestnut with a white star on her forehead. She was saddled and bridled, along with Zachary's own big gray gelding. "I thought you might like to go for a ride. The weather is fine and I know a beautiful spot up in the hills." Eleanor had not been on a horse in years, not since she was a girl, but she was game to try. Zachary helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The contact sent electricity through her, making her breath catch. They rode out of Wallace and up into the foothills, following a trail that wound through pine forests and meadows dotted with early wildflowers. Zachary was patient with Eleanor's rusty riding skills, keeping a slow pace and making sure she was comfortable. The mare was gentle and responsive, making it easy. After about an hour, they crested a ridge and Zachary called a halt. Eleanor gasped at the view. The whole valley spread out before them, the Coeur d'Alene River winding through it like a silver ribbon. In the distance, she could see Wallace, tiny and insignificant against the vast landscape. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "I found this spot a few weeks ago. I have been waiting for the right time to bring you here." Zachary dismounted and helped Eleanor down. He spread a blanket on the grass and they sat, looking out over the valley. For a while, neither spoke. Eleanor was intensely aware of Zachary beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. The spring breeze ruffled his dark hair and she fought the urge to reach up and smooth it back. "Eleanor," Zachary said suddenly, his voice serious. "Can I ask you something?" Her heart began to pound. "Of course. Are you happy? Here in Wallace, working at the store, is this what you want?" It was not what she had expected him to ask. Eleanor considered carefully. "I am content. Mrs. Chen is kind and the work is satisfying. It is certainly better than where I was 2 months ago." "But is it what you want?" he pressed. "If you could have anything, do anything, what would it be?" Eleanor turned to look at him, struck by the intensity in his gray eyes. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because I need to know. I need to understand what you want from life before I can tell you what I want." Her breath caught. "What do you want, Zachary?" He held her gaze for a long moment, then reached out and gently took her hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, sending shivers up her arm. "I want you to come with me when I leave Wallace." Eleanor's mind went blank with shock. "What?" "I have been trying to figure out how to say this for weeks now. Hell, I have been trying to figure out what I was feeling for weeks." He laughed, a sound tinged with frustration. "I told myself I was just helping you out, being a friend, repaying the kindness that was shown to me. But that is not true, or at least it is not the whole truth." "Then what is the truth?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Zachary turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. "The truth is that I have fallen in love with you, completely, utterly, terrifyingly in love with you. I did not plan it, did not want it, tried to fight it. I told myself I was done with love after Catherine, that I would never risk my heart like that again. But then you came into my life and everything changed." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Zachary, let me finish," he said urgently. "I know this is sudden. I know you might not feel the same way, But I cannot leave Wallace without telling you how I feel. I cannot ride away wondering what might have happened if I had just been brave enough to speak up." He squeezed her hand. "These past 2 months with you have been the happiest I have been in years. You make me laugh, you challenge me, you make me want to be a better man. When I am with you, I do not feel broken anymore. I feel whole." A tear rolled down Eleanor's cheek, then another. Zachary looked alarmed. "I am sorry. I did not mean to upset you. If you do not feel the same way, just tell me and we can forget I ever said anything." "You fool," Eleanor said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Of course I feel the same way. I have been in love with you for weeks. I just did not think you could possibly feel the same about me." The expression on Zachary's face was one of pure joy mixed with disbelief. "You love me?" "Yes, you impossible man, I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that night on the bridge, when you held me and begged me to stay." Zachary let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. Eleanor did not care. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on just as tightly, feeling something inside her that had been broken since her mother died suddenly click back into place. When he finally pulled back, it was only far enough to frame her face with his hands. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," she whispered. His lips met hers softly, tentatively, as if she might shatter. But as Eleanor kissed him back, threading her fingers through his hair, the kiss deepened. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses she had fended off from drunken minors. This was tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Come with me," he said again. "Not as my hired help or my charity case. Come with me as my partner. My equal. We can build a life together, Eleanor, a real life. Where would we go? What would we do? Anywhere you want. I have been saving up and I have enough now to buy a small ranch. We could raise horses, maybe cattle. Or we could keep traveling, trading stock, seeing the country. I do not care what we do as long as we are together." It was everything Eleanor had never dared to hope for, a future, a partner, love. "Yes," she said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, I will come with you. I will go anywhere with you." Zachary kissed her again, deeper this time, and Eleanor lost herself in the sensation. When they finally made their way back to Wallace as the sun was setting, everything looked different, brighter, more full of possibility. Over the next few weeks, they made their plans. Zachary wanted to marry her properly before they left Wallace, to make sure Eleanor was protected legally and socially. Eleanor agreed, though she would have been happy to leave immediately. They set the date for early May, giving them time to make arrangements. The wedding was simple, held in the small church on the edge of town with Mrs. Chen and a few of Zachary's trading partners as witnesses. Eleanor wore a dress that Mrs. Chen helped her make, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar. Zachary wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly nervous as they exchanged vows. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Zachary kissed Eleanor with such tenderness that she felt tears prick her eyes. They were tears of joy this time, of gratitude for this second chance at life and love. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, the same building where Zachary had first brought Eleanor after pulling her from the bridge. As they lay together afterward, Eleanor curled against Zachary's chest. She marveled at how much had changed in just 3 months. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, his fingers lazily stroking through her hair. "I was thinking about that night on the bridge. How I was so certain my life was over, that there was nothing left worth living for. And now here I am, married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, about to start a whole new life." Zachary's arms tightened around her. "I was terrified that night, you know. When I saw you standing on that bridge, I felt such fear. I knew if I did not reach you in time, I would regret it for the rest of my life. And then when you fought me, tried to get away, I thought maybe I had made things worse." "You saved me," Eleanor said simply. "In every way a person can be saved. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me that I was worth loving. I will never be able to repay you for that. You do not need to repay me. You being here, choosing me, that is all the repayment I need." He tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "I love you, Eleanor Marlowe, and I promise I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." They left Wallace a week later, all their possessions packed onto 2 horses and a sturdy mule. Zachary had sold most of his string, keeping only the best horses for breeding. They had enough money to buy land and start their ranch, with some left over for supplies and emergencies. Their destination was Montana, up near where Zachary had lived before. He knew the land there, knew where to find good grazing and water. More importantly, he knew people who could help them get established. The journey took nearly 2 weeks, traveling through the mountains and across wide valleys. Eleanor had never seen so much open space, so much wild beauty. Each night, they would make camp and Zachary would build a fire while Eleanor prepared their simple meal. Then they would sit close together, talking about their plans or simply enjoying the peaceful silence of the wilderness. They made love under the stars, wrapped in blankets against the cool mountain air. Zachary was an attentive and passionate lover, always making sure Eleanor was satisfied before seeking his own pleasure. She had been nervous their first time, knowing little of what to expect, but he had been patient and gentle. Now, each time they came together, Eleanor felt her love for him deepen. They reached their destination in late May, a beautiful valley in Montana with a clear stream running through it. Zachary had scouted this land years ago, before everything had fallen apart with Catherine. Now he was able to buy a section of it from the rancher who held the deed. It was not a large spread, just 200 acres, but it was theirs. The first few months were backbreaking work. They lived in a tent while Zachary and a few hired men built a small cabin. Eleanor helped where she could, cooking for the workers and starting a garden near where the house would be. By late summer, they had a snug 2-room cabin with a stone fireplace and a real bed that Zachary had made himself. They also had the beginnings of a horse herd, a dozen mares and a fine stallion that Zachary had been saving for breeding. He worked with the horses every day, his knowledge and skill evident in how they responded to him. Eleanor loved watching him work, seeing the joy on his face when a particularly skittish horse finally trusted him. As fall arrived and the leaves turned gold and red in the mountains, Eleanor realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then told Zachary one evening as they sat by the fire. "I think I am with child," she said, watching his face carefully. Zachary went very still, his gray eyes searching hers. "Are you certain?" "Not completely, but I am fairly sure." "Are you happy about it?" In answer, he pulled her into his lap and held her close, his face buried in her hair. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Terrified, overjoyed, amazed, all of it." "Terrified," Eleanor pulled back to look at him. "I want to be a good father. I want to give our child everything I never had. What if I fail? What if I am not enough?" Eleanor cupped his face in her hands. "You will be wonderful, I know it. You are the kindest, most patient man I have ever known. Our child will be blessed to have you as a father." Over the next months, as Eleanor's belly grew round with their child, Zachary became even more attentive. He insisted she rest more, taking over many of the household chores. He built a cradle from smooth pine and Eleanor sewed tiny clothes, marveling that they would soon have a baby to fill them. The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor suffered from terrible sickness in the early months and exhaustion toward the end. There were times she was frightened, remembering her own mother's difficult labors and eventual death from childbed fever after a stillborn baby. But Zachary was always there, reassuring her, holding her when the fear became overwhelming. In late March of 1884, as spring was just beginning to touch the Montana mountains again, Eleanor went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth, lasting nearly a full day. The midwife from the nearest town stayed with her, and Zachary refused to leave despite the woman's insistence that the birthing room was no place for a man. "That is my wife in there," he said firmly. "I am not leaving." Finally, as dawn broke, the baby came. A boy, healthy and squalling with fury at being thrust into the cold world. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Eleanor's arms, and she looked down at her son with overwhelming love. "He is perfect," she whispered. Zachary knelt beside the bed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he looked at his wife and son. "He is a miracle. You are both miracles." They named him Thomas after Eleanor's father. It felt right to honor the man who, despite his flaws, had loved his daughter. Thomas Bradford's mistakes had led Eleanor to Wallace, to that bridge to Zachary. In a strange way, she owed him everything. Little Thomas was a content baby, quick to smile and laugh. Zachary was besotted, spending hours just holding his son and talking to him. Eleanor would watch them together and feel her heart swell with happiness. This was family. This was home. The years passed quickly. The ranch prospered as Zachary's reputation for quality horses spread. They acquired more land, built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family. 2 years after Thomas came Lily, a beautiful girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Then William arrived 2 years after that, followed eventually by Rosemary. Eleanor often thought back to that night on the bridge, to how close she had come to ending everything. If Zachary had not been there, if he had not cared enough to stop her, none of this would exist. These children, this life, this love, all of it would have been lost. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Eleanor back to that spot in the hills above Wallace where he had first told her he loved her. The children were with a neighbor for the night, giving them rare time alone. They sat on the same ridge, looking out at the valley below, though now it was early evening rather than afternoon. "You remember what you asked me that day," Eleanor said, leaning against Zachary's shoulder. "You asked me what I wanted from life." "I remember. You said you were content, but I wanted to know if you were happy." "I am," Eleanor said softly. "I am more than happy. I am fulfilled in ways I never imagined possible. You gave me that, Zachary. You gave me everything." "We gave it to each other," he corrected, kissing the top of her head. "I was just as lost as you were that night, Eleanor. Maybe I was not standing on a bridge, but I was drifting through life without purpose, without joy. And then I found you, or you found me. However it happened, we found each other. You ever think about Catherine? About what your life would have been like if she had not broken your engagement?" It was a question Eleanor had never asked before, afraid of the answer. But 10 years of marriage had given her confidence in Zachary's love. He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes, but not with regret. What she did hurt me terribly at the time, but now I see it was a blessing. If she had married me, I would never have met you. I would never have had Thomas and Lily and William and Rosemary. I would have had a different life, but not a better one. Not nearly as good." "I feel the same way about my father's death," Eleanor admitted. "It was awful and I grieved him, but it led me to you, and I would not trade what we have for anything." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Finally, as the first stars began to appear, Zachary stood and helped Eleanor to her feet. "We should head back. The children will be home tomorrow and I want to make the most of our time alone." Eleanor laughed, knowing exactly what he meant. After 10 years and 4 children, they still desired each other as much as they had in those early days. If anything, their physical relationship had deepened as their emotional bond grew stronger. They made love that night in the big bed in their ranch house, taking their time, savoring each touch and kiss. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Eleanor felt profound gratitude for the life she had been given. More years passed. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Thomas showed his father's way with horses and often worked alongside Zachary in the corrals. Lily had her mother's love of books and learning, always with her nose in a story. William was the adventurous one, constantly exploring and getting into mischief. And Rosemary, the baby, was sweet and sensitive, attached to both her parents. The ranch continued to thrive. Zachary's breeding program produced some of the finest horses in Montana, sought after by ranchers and the Army alike. Eleanor managed the business side of things, keeping the books and handling correspondence with buyers. They made a good team, each complementing the other's strengths. When Eleanor was 38 and Zachary 42, they were surprised to discover Eleanor was pregnant again. They had thought their family complete, but welcomed this unexpected blessing. In the winter of 1900, as a new century dawned, Eleanor gave birth to twin boys. They named them Joseph, after the rancher who had saved Zachary's life all those years ago, and Samuel. The twins were a handful, keeping both Eleanor and Zachary on their toes despite their older children's help. But they were also a joy, proof that love and life continued in unexpected ways. Thomas grew up and married a local girl, bringing her to live on the ranch and help run the growing operation. Lily eventually became a teacher, opening a small school in the nearby town. William joined the cavalry, much to his mother's worry, though he promised to be careful. Rosemary married young, a rancher's son from the next valley, and gave Eleanor her first grandchild. Through all the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, Eleanor and Zachary remained each other's foundation. They still made time for each other, still talked and laughed and loved as passionately as they had in those early days. The connection forged that night on the bridge had only grown stronger with time. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. The whole community came, neighbors and friends and business associates, all gathering at the ranch to celebrate. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. At one point, Eleanor found herself alone with Zachary on the porch, taking a break from the festivities. He pulled her close and they swayed together to the distant music, moving in perfect synchronization as they had done 1,000 times before. 30 years, Eleanor marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all. Best 30 years of my life, Zachary said firmly. He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes still as striking as they had been when she first saw them. There were lines on his face now, silver in his dark hair, but to Eleanor he was just as handsome as ever. "Do you remember what I said to you that night, when I pulled you back from the edge?" "Please stay," Eleanor quoted softly. "You held me close and said, 'Please stay.' You did. You stayed, and you gave me everything." He kissed her gently. "Thank you for staying, Eleanor. Thank you for choosing life, choosing me, choosing us." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. "Thank you for being there. Thank you for caring about a stranger on a bridge. Thank you for showing me that life was worth living." "Always," Zachary promised. "I will always be here, always care, always love you." They returned to the party, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by friends and the life they had built together. As Eleanor looked around at all the faces, at the ranch that had grown from nothing, at the family that filled it with love and laughter. She felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought of the girl she had been at 21, standing on that bridge in the cold February night, so certain that death was her only option. That girl could never have imagined this future, this abundance of joy. She had been so lost, so broken, unable to see past her pain. But Zachary had seen past it. He had seen possibilities when Eleanor could see only endings. He had believed in her when she could not believe in herself, and his faith had been rewarded 1,000-fold. Years continued to pass, as they always do. Zachary and Eleanor grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing. The twins eventually took over running the ranch with Thomas's help. Zachary could no longer do the hard physical work, but he still spent time with the horses, his gentle touch and patient manner unchanged by age. Eleanor had more grandchildren than she could count, and even a few great-grandchildren. Her cup truly overflowed. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she and Zachary would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, holding hands in comfortable silence. "You have any regrets?" she asked him one evening when she was 63 and he was 67. Zachary thought about it seriously before answering. "Only one. I regret that I did not meet you sooner, that we did not have more time together." "We have had 42 years, Eleanor pointed out. "That is more than many people get." "I would take 100 more if I could." He squeezed her hand. "What about you? Any regrets?" "None," Eleanor said honestly. "Not a single one. Every moment, even the hardest ones, led me to this, led me to you. I would not change anything." They sat in peaceful silence, watching the colors fade from the sky. Eleanor thought about all the moments that had brought them here. Her father's death and the debts he left behind. Her despair and that walk to the bridge. Zachary appearing out of nowhere, pulling her back, holding her close, begging her to stay. She had stayed. And in staying, she had found everything she never knew she needed. On a warm summer morning in 1927, Eleanor woke to find Zachary had passed peacefully in his sleep beside her. He was 77 years old, and they had been married for 44 years. The grief was overwhelming, crushing, a physical pain in her chest. But beneath the grief was gratitude. Gratitude for every moment they had shared, for the life they had built, for the love that had sustained them both. At the funeral, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Eleanor looked at the faces that bore traces of both her and Zachary. Their legacy was not just the ranch or the horses or the land. It was these people, this family, this enduring testament to the power of choosing life and love. Eleanor lived for another 5 years after Zachary's death, cared for lovingly by her family. She spent her time with her grandchildren, teaching them to read and telling them stories about the old days. She told them about their grandfather, about his kindness and strength, and the way he could gentle the wildest horse with just his voice and patience. And sometimes, when the children asked about how she and Zachary had met, Eleanor would tell them the truth. She would tell them about being lost and alone and standing on a bridge in the cold February night. About a cowboy who had stopped her from jumping, who had held her close and said, "Please stay." About choosing to live and finding that life was sweeter than she ever could have imagined. On a spring morning in 1932, Eleanor Bradford Marlowe passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by photographs of her family. She was 70 years old. She was laid to rest beside Zachary on the hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children and grandchildren continued to run the ranch for generations, always remembering the story of how it all began. The story of a desperate woman on a bridge and a compassionate cowboy who cared enough to stop. The story of two broken people who found healing in each other. The story of a love that transformed everything. Years turned into decades, and the ranch remained in the family, a testament to the legacy Eleanor and Zachary had created. Their great-great-grandchildren would walk the same land, ride the same trails, and sleep under the same Montana sky. And though they never met their ancestors, they knew the story. They knew about the night their great-great-grandfather saved their great-great-grandmother's life. They knew about the bridge and the plea to stay, and the love that grew from that desperate moment. The story became family legend, passed down through generations as a reminder that hope can be found in the darkest moments. That sometimes a stranger's kindness can change the course of a life. That love, when it comes, is worth holding on to with everything you have. The ranch house still stood, expanded and modernized, but with the original two-room cabin preserved at its heart. In that cabin hung a photograph, faded with age, of a handsome man with gray eyes and a beautiful woman with dark hair. They stood together in front of their ranch, his arm around her waist, both smiling with the kind of contentment that comes from a life well lived and a love well earned. Beneath the photograph was a small plaque with an inscription that Eleanor had written shortly before her death. It read, "He asked me to stay, and in staying I found everything. This is what love does. It saves us, heals us, and gives us reasons to believe tomorrow will be better than today." Zachary and Eleanor Marlowe, February 1883 to forever. The story of their love lived on, inspiring each new generation to believe in second chances, in the possibility of redemption, in the power of choosing hope over despair. It reminded them that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to our greatest blessings, if only we are brave enough to walk through them. And on cold February nights, when the wind howled down from the mountains and the stars shone bright and clear, some family members swore they could still feel the presence of Eleanor and Zachary watching over the ranch. Still together, still in love, still grateful for that night on the bridge when everything changed. When a cowboy stopped a woman from jumping, held her close and said, "Please stay." And she did, and it made all the difference.